As I was reading through the Transfiguration story this year, I started thinking about how this plays out, this story of ancestors showing up. It plays out in all of the epic stories when there's a character, usually a hero, who is in some kind of no turning back of making an important decision. And right about then, this council shows up to give advice, or there's some purpose for it. Or it happens when the character is trying to run away from what they must do and they need some encouragement to do the thing that they must. I'm not sure which was the case for Jesus. It happened in The Lion King when Simba goes off on his own out of shame and finds himself staring into a reflective pool. And because he's grown up and no longer looks like a young cub, he finds it's his father staring back at him. Well, he knows it's him, but Mufasa says, "He lives in you, your father, he lives in you." And then his father speaks to him saying, "You have forgotten who you are, and so you have forgotten me. Look inside yourself, Simba. You are more than what you have become. You must take your place in the circle of life. Remember who you are." It happens to Luke in Return of the Jedi when he gets a visit from Obi-Wan Kenobi and Rey several movies later, who climbs up that mountain to find the much, not older Luke, kind of older Luke. Or in the Black Panther movie when T'Challa becomes king and then goes through this ceremony where he ends up on the other side and meets his father. And he begins by saying, "I'm sorry," and bends down on his knees. And his father says, "Stand up. You are a king." And he answers, "I'm not ready." And his father says, "Have you not prepared for this, studied and been by my side your whole life? You have a good heart, and it is hard for a man with a good heart to be king, so you will struggle. But surround yourself with good people." How do these stories of the talking with ancestors function in all of these different epic stories? I think they give strength and purpose and reminders, sort of galvanize people to go on, a voice that they can trust at a moment when they are looking, everyone is looking to them, to be the leaders, to be the one to trust. It's a lonely place when you find yourself at the top with everyone looking up to you. So these moments in stories and movies mark a transition, a decision time, a time when there might be a hesitation about going forward, not knowing if they're ready to go forward, and already grieving the life that they are going to be leaving behind. I've told you in the last few weeks about the way the book of Mark, the Gospel of Mark, is like an Aaron Sorkin script, fast-paced movement from one thing to the next immediately. Everything is immediate. Another literary feature in the book of Mark is that Jesus is always ordering people to tell no one what they have seen or what has been done and said. And despite that, people are always telling everyone or yelling out loud, "Jesus Christ, Son of God." And I just imagine Jesus like, "Oh, could you just keep it down a little bit?" In chapter 7, verse 36, after Jesus does the thing with the spit in the ear for the man who is deaf, we read that Jesus commanded them not to tell anyone. But the more he did so, the more people kept talking about it. I don't know why he is always telling people to tell no one. Much theological ink has been spilled over that question, and you can ponder it too and come to your own conclusions. But today I'm wondering if it was because he didn't feel quite ready yet, or he didn't want to rush into what was coming next, was holding on to his privacy, his freedom, his life for a little while longer. Or maybe he just hadn't quite come into his own yet, couldn't quite take on that role. In fact, a few verses before this, Jesus seems to be wrestling with this question and considering all of this because he asks those strange questions of the disciples. "Who do people say that I am?" And they answered him, "John the Baptist, and others Elijah, and still others one of the prophets." And then, "But who do you say that I am?" And when Peter answers, "You are the Messiah," he tells him sternly not to tell anyone about him. And then he starts telling them about how the Messiah must undergo great suffering, be rejected by the elders and all the rest, and then be killed. And after 3 days, rise again. A heavy and confusing conversation. And soon after that, they're walking up that mountain with our story today, where they walk up the mountain and then find themselves in this light cloud with Moses and Elijah. Maybe when he was walking up that mountain, he's wondering about the giants of faith, the giants of his faith. And instead of asking, what would Jesus do? He's asking, what would Moses do? And what would Elijah do? What would the prophets do? And maybe they show up to tell him. So what did Jesus and Moses and Elijah talk about that night up on the mountain? Or did they talk? We'll never know, of course, but it seems this was what was needed for Jesus to move on, up on that mountain. That's the turning point. He's turning his head towards what has to come, towards Jerusalem. He'll keep teaching and preaching and healing, and he knows that all of this, because of all the talk, will lead to his death. Because you don't get to do those kinds of things and act and speak with that kind of power and authority, threatening any earthly powers without getting killed. That's the end result here. I figure when Martin Luther King, on the last night of his life, when he said, I have seen the mountain, he was speaking both of the mountain that Moses stood on back in Exodus, one that he referred to a lot, when God showed up and showed him the promised land that his people would get to, but he would not. And this mountain that Moses stood on with Jesus, when he gives Jesus what he needs to go on and do the thing that he must, walk towards Jerusalem, towards the inevitable humiliation, the cross, and the death. On Transfiguration Sunday, we come to the end of another liturgical season. Having seen the lights of Epiphany, we prepare now for the long shadows of Lent. And I don't know what journeys we'll encounter along that way. I don't know how God might invite us to change, to grow, to keep on journeying. And I don't know what losses and sorrows those crosses will include. But this week's stories bear witness to something true about the life of faith. We can trust that the next steps as we turn towards what we have to do, because we have those who have gone before us, there beside us in various ways, including Jesus, and our own Moseses and Elijahs, the saints in our own lives who pave the way, who teach us how to be, who have taught us who we have learned from, who remind us who we are and what we are called to do. May we be ready for them and listen for them and know that there will be a time when we too are required to deny ourselves and take up a cross to follow.